I'm very honored to moderate this panel, which is a very challenging task just after lunch. So usually people would like to sleep, but I'm very confident that with the three very interesting lectures we'll have, nobody will fall asleep. So our panel is composed of two parts. So first the lectures, 20 minutes, altogether 1 hour. And at the end, there will be a 15-20 minutes session for questions and answers. So I have many questions, but I will open for the floor to you and ask my questions if there is time. So our first lecture will be given by Dr. Tamás NYIRKOS, who is a political philosopher. He obtained his PhD in moral and political philosophy in 2011. His dissertation was about political theology on the French counter-revolution, which I like very much because I'm French. He's recognized in Hungary as one of the leading contemporary specialists in political philosophy in the fields of political theology, conservative thought, and secular religions. So he's currently professor at Pázmány Katholikus University, and also research fellow here in Ludovika. So today, Dr. Tamás NYIRKOS will explore a theological re-evaluation of St. Augustine's just war theory and emphasize the need to rethink the theory in light of contemporary conflicts.
So I think that so far we have heard more about the just peace than about just war, strictly speaking. So let me give you a brief overview of mainly the history of just war theory. Because my so let me start with two reminders, so to speak. The first one is that just war theory is still relevant. So although it is sometimes disputed, sometimes we are told that, things like, international law or international human rights regimes are more important or taking the place of just war theory. But still, if you take a look at the academic discussion, then you will see that I only made some research into the past 20 years of books which explicitly mention, only those books which explicitly mention just war in their title. And there are literally dozens of them. And if we add also books which talk about military ethics, or the ethics of war, ethics of warfare, then it goes up to hundreds. So these are just a few examples, as I said, so from the past 20 years. And you can see, so some of them are textbooks, some of them are historical books, some of them are philosophical books about the contemporary debates about just war, some of them are contemporary comparative analyses, and so on. And also some of them are tackling the issue in connection with other fields like environment and so on and so on. So no, this is far from over. Just war theory is still very relevant. So this is my first reminder. And the second reminder is that Christian theology and Christian philosophy is one of the main sources even of modern just war theory. So in Europe or in the West, actually, when we talk about just war theory, it is impossible to avoid reference to the Christian origins of this. It's not the only. These are not the only origins, but some of the most important. So these are my two reminders, and this is why a few years ago, when the encyclical Fratelli Tutti was issued by Pope Francis, it took as a surprise that he made some very strange remarks about the status of just war theory. So let me quote these passages word by word. So when it says, "We can no longer think of war as a solution, because its risks will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a just war. Never again war. And there is a footnote to this passage which says, St. Augustine, who forged the concept of just war that we no longer uphold in our own day, also said that it is a higher glory still to stay war itself with a word than to slay man with the sword, and to procure or maintain peace by peace, not by war. Now, this is a very very complicated passage, actually, because if you take a look at it, so we can no longer think of war as a solution. So this no longer clause seems to imply that it is henceforth impossible to think of war as a solution, regardless of what sort of wars may appear in the future. Why? The argument for this radical claim only states that the risks of war will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. So, of course, the probabilistic argument can never prove a universal proposition. So what follows from the former is only that we can probably no longer think of war as a solution, and not that we cannot do so under any circumstance. And also the same ambiguity is enhanced by the phrase very difficult. Because, of course, however difficult it is to invoke the criteria of just war, it is certainly not impossible. Difficult is not impossible. For, Christians have done many difficult things in the past and are sometimes called to do the same today. So especially if their acts are supported by, as the passage says, a rational argument. So this is another very peculiar addition which seems to acknowledge that the traditional criteria of just war may have been reasonable, while the present encyclical refrains from providing similar ones and only relies on such exhortations as never again war, never again war. But anyway, so these are two passages which are very difficult to interpret, and that is why I first looked back. So what is this? What is this idea of Saint Augustine? What is this concept of just war, which Saint Augustine forged, and which is impossible to uphold in our own day? And for me, the main lesson from Augustine is that it is not actually a theory of just war. So there is no such thing as a theory of just war. Not because Augustine was careless to do so, but because he was only interested in the concept of just war in the context of his whole theology, ontology, anthropology, anthropological ethics, and moral philosophy, or philosophy of history. So as one of my former teachers at the university, who wrote a very good article about the just war theory of the non-existent just war theory of Augustine, but only in the Hungarian language, Daniel Schmal, he once made this very enlightening claim in his article that for Augustine the issue of bellum justum is first and foremost a theological issue. Its material, despite its many practical aspects, is impossible to grasp as a material specifically related to war, for all its practical elements gravitate toward the theological center of sin and redemption. So what I want to say is that Augustine is only interested in just war insofar it has something to do with sin and redemption. And that's why he was not, so the reason why he didn't create something like a just war theory is not because he didn't want to write something like it, but because he made those remarks in different books, different letters, whenever he faced a theological problem concerning sin and redemption, and he had to answer some problems related to war, then he did it there. So, but always in a theological context. So, for example, in the Questiones in Heptateuchum, when he talks about, unlike modern just war theories, it is not about self-defense and things like that. It is about correcting injustice. So whatever kind of injustice occurs, the main, what would later be called causa justa, the just cause, is everything that tries to correct something which is wrong. Also, again, in the Questiones in Heptateuchum, he again, of course, talks about the holy wars of the Jews and said that, of course, every war is just which is commanded by God. But again, this is a theological argument which said that there is a right order in the world, and the first and foremost, you have to obey God, you have to love God, and everything else only comes later. So again, this is part of the theological system. And also in the Contra Faustum, when there is this very famous passage where he says, what is the evil in a war? Is it the death of someone who will soon die in any case? No, this is mere cowardly dislike, not any religious feeling. The real evils in a war are cupidity for violence, revengeful cruelty, restless and implacable enmity, wild resistance, the lust of power, libido dominandi, and such like. And mind you, all these things that he makes a list of, all these belong to the disorders of the soul. So actually this is a theology or a philosophy of the soul connected to a theology or a metaphysics of the entire universe. And even the later criterion of legitimate authority, again, he connects it to St. Paul's warning in the letter to the Romans, there is no authority except from God. So again, even legitimate authority is some way connected to the theological framework. So that is why I think that we started to misunderstand Augustine at the very moment when we tried to transform this very complex theological, philosophical, and ethical and anthropological system into something like a list of criteria. And it began in the Middle Ages. Otherwise, I'm a great admirer of medieval scholastics and canon law, but in this case, it was a very questionable move. So when Gratian's Decretum first tried to summarize the teaching of Augustine on war, making it a list, and later on, Decretists like Rufinus did the same. And again, later philosophers like Alexander of Hales and others, or Raymond of Peñafort and other decretalists, what they came up with was something which they found in Augustine, but somehow reframed it into another sort of system. As I said, Augustine's system is a system, so it is a system, but a very complex philosophical, theological system. And now they want to make it a very complex legal system instead. So where you have paragraphs and you have exact laws for everything. And this is why these in the beginning are quite complicated lists themselves. So for example, in Alexander of Hales, you have auctoritas, so authority, you have affectus, you have intentio, intention, conditio, causa, meritum. Okay, so you understand. So authority, the kind of affection, kind of emotion which leads you in the war, kind of intention. So what are your intentions in the war? What is your condition? So, for example, whether you are a priest or a lay person, or a leader or a simple person. The causa, again, so the reason for going to war, or the meritum, this means that whether the enemy merits the fate it is subject to in a war. And later on, others after them even added different further criteria like animus, so the state of the soul in which you wage war, or conditio was changed to persona, meritum to res. So we had this very complicated series of lists, which actually became so complicated that, as everyone knows, Thomas Aquinas, in his Summa, in the Secunda Secundae, the 40th question, is the perhaps most famous or most widely cited text of medieval just war theory. He actually reduced the number of criteria to 3. So authority, cause, and intention. And this is where you already see that, so we had so it seems like Augustine's theory was too complicated for more legally minded medieval authors. But then again, their lists were also still very complicated to philosophers like Aquinas. And they tried to reduce the number of criteria. So now we only have 3 criteria. And mind you, so if we talk about, reduction or simplification, let us not forget that that in the case of, for example, the Crusades, it's a very brief but great article from the 1970s, still by Leroy P. Walters, where he actually makes a very good point that the just war theory and the theory of the so-called holy wars was practically analogous to each other. So there was no distinct holy war theory, but that medieval just war theory also served to justify so-called holy wars or the Crusades. Again, we have an authority like the Pope. We have a just cause, for example, to defend Christians or Christian holy places in the Holy Land, and we have to have a right intention, a jus in bello, so when a kind of behavior, right behavior in war. So it is already kind of a simplification, and I think that in the early modern age we also go further on this road. When Francisco de Vitoria, a Dominican theologian in the 16th century, when talking about the invasion of the New World, the Americas, he actually makes the claim, this very famous claim, that it is particularly necessary to ask this question in connection with the case of the Indian aborigines, as he calls them, which is now before us. And my first proposition is that difference of religion is not a cause of just war. So again, saying that within the list of criteria, for example, a difference in religion cannot be a justification of war. And yes, after this, for the 18th and 19th centuries, we can say that just war theory has a decline, not only in the world, but also in the Catholic or other Christian churches. It only starts to come back in the 20th century. But as I myself argue, this revival of the just war theory also brings with it a further simplification, further reduction of criteria. Because if, for example, if we listen to the Christmas message of Pope Pius XII during the Second World War, there he explicitly said, it makes only one small remark saying that a war of aggression is always unjust, but it still says that, so maybe there is only one just cause remaining, and it is self-defense. A defensive war maybe can be just, but an offensive war can never be. And then comes the 1960s, the nuclear age, when of course the encyclical Pacem in Terris by Pope John XXIII again deals with the issue of weapons of mass destruction, which is again suggests that perhaps all wars from now on are senseless, and we will not have something like just war. And going back to the Fratelli Tutti, when Pope Francis quoted this "never again" war, this "never again" war was made by Pope Paul VI in the United Nations. It is a little ironic that he quoted it from President Kennedy, by the way, so who may not have been a just war theorist himself. But again, but still, of course, just war, there it remained in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and it's still there. But if you look closely, what a just cause can be, then it is usually only self-defense. So this is how we arrive to Fratelli Tutti, which actually seems to imply, although it doesn't say it explicitly, it seems to imply that maybe just war theory in its entirety is over. It is outdated. And yes, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, and this is my last section. So at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, he said, as you can see, Pope tells Russian Orthodox leader there's no such thing as just war. And yes, so this is what he explicitly said, that at one time we also spoke in our churches of holy war and just war. Today we cannot speak like that. The Christian conscience has developed on the importance of peace. Wars are always unjust. Wars are always unjust. Okay, and so it now seems that the number of criteria is reduced to 0, but again, this was not the last word, because just a few weeks later, already Cardinal Parolin said that, of course, Ukraine has the right to defend itself, although arms shipments could cause a terrible escalation. And yes, again, a few weeks or months later, Pope Francis himself asserted that Ukraine had the right to exist and had the right to defend itself against Russian invasion and many others. Pope says supplying weapons to Ukraine is morally acceptable, but only for self-defense and so on and so on. Okay, so to conclude, what I want to say is that the problem, so there you can see, so without any malevolence, I would say that there's a great ambiguity there. And I think that this great ambiguity is caused by this attitude to make lists, and then count the criteria, whether we have 1 criteria, 3 criteria. No, you can never use such an abstract list of criteria in real life. So when you face a real problem in this real world, like the war in Ukraine, then you can only make some more sophisticated and more complex statement, and not just, okay, so this is either a yes or no question. And that is why I think that this is a good step back to the right way. So we started with a very complex theory, then we had a list of criteria, then we had a reduced set of criteria, and now it seems to me that we are moving back to a more complex theory, and I think that's what should be done. So, but it shouldn't stop there. So, because self-defense as one criteria is impossible to grasp the whole complexity of the problem. So we should not stop there. What the Church and the world needs is a thorough theological, anthropological, philosophical, and comprehensive moral recontextualization of the theory of just war, which would, by the way, also mean that we return to Augustine, also in the way that we return to his more realistic approach to politics, or the world of politics, which is necessarily imperfect and is very different from abstract moral ideals or even utopias. Okay, thank you very much.